Thinking about all these ideas running around in your head? Can't make heads or tails as where you want to start your journey? Pause. Think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. Join our co-sponsors, Dom Dev Enterprises and Page Investments, and our friends down there at Island East Realty, D1 Development, and Sammy's Chicken. Let us know where you are, what you're thinking. Post your questions and share this show with all your friends because we can get into some deep talk today on a very light level. We'll be right back.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. And what we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 2 for 2. So this evening we have another special guest on our show, a gentleman by the name of Keyshawn Monroe. He is a deep young man. Don't mind the goggles and the locks. There's plenty thought going on in that head. And he terminates it and puts it on paper and film and many other medium so that we can inspire ourselves to move to higher heights. Keyshawn is a documentarian, a researcher, a disciplinary artist. He's also an avid explorer. He also has frequently engaged in anthropological expeditions. And that's where we get into this part of being the art man. So when we look at it, we also know that he has leveraged his work from a historical analysis, and he's done some major pieces that we're going to talk about, some of them tonight. And you might know one of them in terms of Cuba and Bahamas conflict. Monroe is also a notable work and that work is the Swan Song of the Flamingo that we know very well, as comes up every year that everyone said. We also know that he is a man on the move. And so we would like to welcome Mr. Keyshawn Monroe to the show. Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. Welcome.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks for having me on.
You're quite welcome. So when you would have been able to do all these fancy things that you come up with in this art world and the art space and the like, most people think about art as just drawing little things on a piece of paper or on a mural and the like. But you become the art, at least that's what I call it. You get one fancy name for it too in there. And so when we look at this, we want to ask you that what are the purpose of art?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. For me, I think that art is life and life is art, right? If you study the history of art, if you study the history of communication, you would find that some of the earliest humans, right, what they left behind, which is history, is representations of what they saw. What they did was they found things or ways to archive their environment, their experiences, whether it be hunting, whether it be just their way of life, right? So those are the things that remain from like thousands of years ago, hundreds and thousands of years ago. Whether they are covered up, we sometimes unearth them and we learn even more about ourselves, right? As human beings, we learn a lot more about our cultures, our interactions, what we learn, what we unlearn, education, miseducation, right? So for me, art is life, life is art, and it's very much a spiritual thing for me. It's very much so a challenge right? One of the reasons I'm in the Bahamas right now is not because it's easy, it's because it's hard. It's a challenge. I've traveled extensively. Uh, I've seen what it takes to live successfully as a professional artist in other parts of the world, right? And I decide to come back home because I see the beauty in coming back home. I do realize that this limestone does, in fact, have gold, right? So some people just walk over it and call it dirt, but I see it for what it is because I I see the world through different lenses, right? Because I place importance, I think, on different things. Uh, One of the best things I think that happened for me was my thesis. And what I did was I thoroughly examined myself, my family members, my immediate family members, uh, basically the physical characteristics, and I tried to understand, or I tried to analyze or speculate on what in our histories caused us to generate certain physical characteristics like frown lines or laugh lines. What about our history uh, informed me as the artist, as the viewer of the photos, the documentation I was looking at, right? And so having to do that on yourself makes you, it's like staring into the mirror so long that you almost feel like you're staring at somebody else, right? And so that actually became the methodology for my practice. My practice is all about introspection, it's about reflection, right? So I constantly stare in the mirror because every time I stare in the mirror, I ask myself new questions. And I realize that I am more than just me. I am my forefathers, I am my ancestors, I have that ancestral DNA. I have that memory, that history. But you just have to learn that when you look at yourself from different perspectives, you will see different persons, right? Not that you're a split personality, but you would see, like for example, I'm really just now uh, so enthralled with the ocean, right? Uh, and that just happened to me later on in life, right? Uh, I grew up, of course, in the Bahamas, which is a island nation, archipelago. But around the time I was about 30, it was almost like this calling, right? And when I study uh, my lineage more, I learned that all of my family members were seamen. They lived in the ocean, they lived in the sea, they lived on boats, right? I didn't think that I had it in me like that, but it's like, sometimes you have these allergies, and these allergies don't manifest themselves physically until later on in life, right? And so I feel it's kind of like the same way. Some things just happen to you later on, uh, whether it be the path that you have taken, or just interventions of some sort, or it's just sometimes it's just meant to be. Some families have a lot of singers, some families have a lot of businessmen because it's in you, right?
Right.
It's literally in you.
So that's something like the whatever blew past the air just now and caused me to cough, right? It happens in time and whenever it's supposed to happen before. And so when we look at what you were just talking about, you are doing all of this on a basis that you have a lot of experience and you have academics as a bachelor's of fine arts and master's in fine arts, and you're a professor, assistant professor at the University of Bahamas. So you interfacing with a lot of young people,
Yes.
and so you're seeing them, their images reflecting on you too, so that people that always say people who you're in contact with, you get some sort of vibe from them and move forward. So tell us then, this concept calling the tying in history with the art intervention. And I always look at art intervention as two big combo words. Break that down for us, and what does that mean?
Okay, so basically art intervention. So it's art designed to interact with a situation or other art or other structures. right? So I use my art more so as a catalyst for activism, right? So let me give you a little more history on how I got more into art intervention, right? So when I was at the Savannah College of Art and Design,
Right.
uh, one of the first jobs that I got was with the Telfair Museum of Art. And so I went in there, and I wasn't working inside the museum. They asked me to be an outreach artist. And I thought it was like a curse. Like, you don't think I'm good enough to like work inside the gallery, inside the museum? And so what they had me do was I was working with like at risk youth, toddlers to like pre-teenagers, and these basically in the rougher parts of town, right? I also had to work with senior citizens at like old folks' homes. So I would have to spend time with them, and each time, especially with the senior citizens, they would speak to me. They would say, "I see this in you. You know, I love this about you. This is what you need to do." They would give me words of wisdom, words of encouragement. This is what I would do if I were your age, And so it really got a different gear turning in my mind as to the importance, the significance of art and what I should be using it to do. Because if all of these persons are coming up to me telling me
Right.
this is what they see inside me, again, you're dealing with uh, rough gold, right? So each comment that they give, each word of wisdom that they give was like refinement, helping me to discover myself. And so, like I said, I work with at risk youth. And so, being from the Bahamas, we take for granted that we could walk around every day. We're surrounded by Olympians,
Right.
people like Sidney Poitier. Uh, we have black people who we could recognize as successful,
Right.
you know, and so we walk around with a certain audacity, uh, uh, this belief that we can achieve, that we can exist on the global stage at the top, right? And so when I walked into those spaces, that is what they saw, that's what they told me they saw, right? And that the children kind of picked up on. And so I really had to tap into art intervention once again. How do I get art? How do I use art to get these children who've thrown up gang signs,
Right.
right? Cussing, coming late to class? How do I get them to the point? Well, at the end of the day, they were coming on time, speaking properly, respecting one another, dressing different, speaking different, teaching one another, and wanting to come to class, right? All because of art. And so that actually led into me drafting or designing a project that I titled the Universal Human Experience. So all of this was happening around the time when the war in Iraq, right,
Right.
in the Middle East was still fresh, right? Everybody was talking about profiling, racial tension, ethnic
Right.
tensions, and so I drafted the universal human experience, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm tired watching the news. You know, people telling me what's biased from what's not biased. Let me
Right.
go out and have my own experiences, right? Let people respond to me, and let my truth be my truth, and then I could share that with other persons who could come up and make their own conclusions, right? So that's my background to a certain degree on art intervention.
Okay, and so now with that perspective, then in intersecting art intervention with history to allow you to breathe success, um, why the combo history and art intervention? Because those two seem to stand out a lot. Because a lot of your work, when I look at it, it's dwelling a lot on what has happened in the past and what is happening, and then you want to be physically in the art. That's the way I look at it, and so forth. Why that combination? What inspired that?
Definitely, because I mean, in order to move forward, you have to have a point to say where you're moving from, right?
Okay.
To see at least, okay, this is the progress. But if you never mark where you're coming from, you never know what your progress is. That's one. Number two, I spoke about DNA. I spoke about knowing your ancestry to a certain degree. And so you have to study your past because you never know what's inside you. Like, you have to know your history when you go to the doctor. Do you have a history of
Right.
diabetes,
Right.
heart problems? But if you don't know that, that's something that you need to know. right? So it's the same thing with everything else. What are you good at? Maybe you're a mathematician. You might fail
Mm-hmm.
every English course on earth, but you're just good with math, right? And so it's I think it's important to know those types of things, and being in this region, being this conch island, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have in the Caribbean or in the Bahamas where we have people from everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
so many cultures, right? And then uh, some ethnicities not knowing a major part of their history, not being able to trace their family tree back far enough to really know who they are, right? And so again, that leads back to my thesis: me staring in the mirror, me staring at my parents,
Right.
trying to figure out like who are we really, like we could do this DNA, ancestry.com, and they tell you, oh, you part Nigerian, part this, that, and the next, right? But
Mm-hmm.
how do you tap into that, right? And so on top of that, being in the Bahamas just is the gateway to the new world,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something we overlook so much and so significant. Even though we uh, breaking up
Yeah.
Columbus,
Right.
that
Yeah.
is significant
Mm-hmm.
to our history. I'm not saying that we should celebrate it, but I'm saying it is significant because of what it cost in this part of the world. It actually led to slavery, which
Right.
led to the
Mm-hmm.
Industrial Revolution, which led to all of the other revolutions and globalization, right?
Right.
So when you look at it, the Bahamas plays a very, very significant role in that narrative that is the history of what we know as the round earth, because before it was flat,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have to kind of unflatten the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that uh, we need to do more, especially in the Bahamas. And I didn't realize it until I went to Savannah, Georgia, for school.
Mm-hmm.
And Savannah is one of the first slave ports in America,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's on the East Coast for those who don't know. It's a very, very structured, a very planned city. Everything is in a grid.
Mm-hmm.
It's very well known for its architecture. People go there specifically to study architecture, town planning, etc. So, transitioning from the Bahamas, where when you go downtown, you don't even have roads on streets. You're going down a two-way lane that look like a walkway. Uh, that's not planned, basically, right?
Well, most of our roads are just made as a result of that's the track road that people used to walk on, and so they didn't make
Yeah.
them into roads, really clean road. Yeah.
Yeah. So making that transition from a place like that that's not planned to a place that's very much so planned, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing their monuments, seeing the historic preservation, seeing the stories, seeing the way that Hollywood is attracted to it for
Right.
those various reasons, and seeing what it could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then multiplying that in my head with the history that I wanted to learn so much more about, because I realized that there are so many layers to history, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's history that you have to unearth, and then there's history that you are supposed to create,
Okay.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
people just look at history as a backward thing.
Mm-hmm.
uh, what I said half a second ago is already history.
Right.
So
Right.
history is almost like now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you always have to think about creating history, creating an archive, and so that leads to like the path that I've actually taken in my life, because I realize, okay, every step you kind of take is a part of this history,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you kind of have to order your steps. You have to live a purposeful life, because nobody is really uh, guaranteed any time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of this is coming out of the fact that I had a few near-death experiences,
Oh.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
some persons had this experience even coming out of the pandemic. Once
Right.
you've already gone through certain
Mm-hmm.
traumas, right, you realize that you're only like one breath, half a breath away from not even being here, not
Right.
being
Yeah.
able to do certain things. So if you have something, if you have identified something that you truly believe is your purpose, then you're gonna use that time, because you see it's so fleeting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
This life.
Yeah. So when we look at that, then with the young people, they're all about getting big, becoming big, and a lot of people always say art is not the environment where you get rich quick kind of thing, and so forth. So how would you define what is success? Because they all want to be successful, but I don't know if they could even define what is success.
Yeah, that's a good question because you too often see quote unquote successful people who commit suicide,
Right.
right? And everybody looks at them and said, "But you had everything in the world. Like you were so successful. Like why would that person commit suicide?"
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to realize that maybe they did not see themselves as successful.
Right.
And so I look at success, or I see success as when I speak about purpose, it's me being able to move toward that purpose, right? To make some progress toward that purpose, my purpose, not somebody else's purpose. I think too often persons see uh, other people who are successful, right, or who are perceived as being successful,
Mm-hmm.
right, and they go beyond being inspired. They try to mimic, right, the life. They start talking like them, walking like them. Even all of their life movements become like that. Oh, because Jordan did this, I'm gonna do it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't move toward your purpose like that because sometimes people stumble upon success,
Mm-hmm.
right? It wasn't really planned, and all we see is the success. We don't really see the burden of what we perceive to be the success. And so, success for me is uh, I'm more so about art intervention, being able to use my talents on my artwork, right? Not just visual work, not just audible work, but anything that could stimulate, right, as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's always changing, especially with new technology, electronic media. We're speaking about the metaverse now. Like 10 years ago, we would not have dreamt that something like this probably would be happening
Mm-hmm.
so quickly, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, that's my definition of success: being able to identify your purpose, and then moving toward that sense of purpose, uh, and doing it not only gradually, but doing it for me more so intentionally.
Intentionally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and without being distracted by what others
Mm-hmm.
tell me is success, or what the rest of the world see as success, because everybody wants money. Like you said, I wanted money, I wanted the bling, I wanted my name to be
Mm-hmm.
a big signature on everything, and then I stopped signing my work, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least on the front, right? There was a period I
Mm-hmm.
stopped signing it completely. Then I stopped signing it on the front because authorship is a different conversation in the art world,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like everybody. Artists change when you speak about maturity, right? And it all depends on why you're in the game. Not everybody is going to be in the game for the same purpose as me,
Right.
and they shouldn't be, or else they wouldn't be living probably their purpose. Somebody's purpose is to be a commercial artist,
Right. Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then somebody's purpose is to be the opposite of a commercial
Mm-hmm.
artist. So you
Mm-hmm.
just have to find the thing that works for you. And sometimes you might not think it works for you, but it is something that people respond to. So it might seem like a burden to you, but it's the thing that the world needs. So it's a tricky kind of topic to feel out.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna take a break, and we're gonna be back in a couple of seconds. So we're here with Keyshawn Monroe. This is Dale Happy Nose and something to think about. And we're talking about his art intervention and crossing it, intersecting it with history, and being able to become successful. And when we come back, we will talk a little bit about some of his successes.
Sammy's Chicken. There's nothing like it.
Sometimes it's hard to find a company that can get the job done right. At Mission Complete, we do just that. Mission Complete offers a wide variety of services from janitorial to sanitation to pressure washing pool decks and patios. We're also proud to offer COVID-19 decontamination for your home or business. And for those multi-legged critters, we call in our pest control and rodent team. Why call 4 different companies when you can call just one and get the job done? Call us now and let's get this mission started.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knows. We're here with Keishan Monroe, and we're talking about art intervention, intersecting with history, and how it became his journey, his enabler to breed success. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about success and what it means to him, and so forth. And so, Keishan, as we close that portion out, I wanted to just ask for you in terms of what it is that actually tells you that you are being successful, other than the fact that you have a goal and you say, okay, I want to be able to reach down to Chicken Unlimited by 20 or Sammy's Chicken by 10 o'clock tomorrow. I mean, that's a set goal, but what are the signs that come to you that tells you as an individual that you're doing your purpose and you are fulfilling your goal? Is it a feeling? Is it what tells you that?
I think that man is a communal creature, right? So we can't live like eagles, right? Some people can, of course, but in general, we are very communal. And so I feel as though each person is put in a specific place, right? At specific times for specific reasons. And each of us has something to contribute. And our goal is, so it's like a treasure hunt, right? In life. And your talent may be hidden. Some person's talents are hidden a lot deeper than others, right? So your goal in life is to find that talent wherever it is. It might be on the surface or it might be buried. And so your path or your journey to finding that talent or unearthing that talent is a part of what I see as success, right? And yeah, so I everything that I do is kind of driven by motivation, right? Because even through my travels, I think we might talk about it. When I graduated from university, I told you I planned what was really a global expedition. I focused more so on the Americas, where I backpacked throughout the Americas by myself for almost 2 years, right? And so being by myself, having to communicate in areas where I did not speak the language, right? So basically having to adapt, right, is what I had to do. And I did that very intentionally to force myself to have to learn sign language to a certain degree, right? Have to learn Spanish, the variations of Spanish, right? The dialects, the slangs, right? To have to be even English, you'd be surprised. You speak in the same language, but you're not speaking the same language, right? So there's so much that is miscommunicated and misunderstood. Uh, that I found myself just focusing on listening to people, right? Communication, I think, is key, and mentorship is key. And when we speak about mentorship, we or wisdom or learning from other people, we usually think about older persons. But I feel as though you could learn something from every single individual that you, I don't care if it's a toddler or newborn baby, you could always learn something. And it's not necessarily what is presented to you, it's the way that you look at it, right? Or the way that you don't look at it. Sometimes you just need to close your eyes to really see things, right? And so, yeah, I just feel as though communication is very important. I think that mentorship is very important. And I don't want to stray too much off your.
No, no,
Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah. Okay. So, folks you out there, you're welcome to ask your questions online, and we'll ask them to our guest here today, Kishan, and hopefully we'll be able to address them all. And we welcome you all again. I think I saw Mrs. Hannah pop up earlier, and one or two other persons that my little short head can't remember right now, but I'm sure they'll come back in my mind and I'll acknowledge you. So Helen Barton Hannah is saying, what is the biggest misconception about the history culture, and how has your perception changed since you began exploring this intersection?
the biggest misconception, culture in general, or our culture, or
Well, I guess the culture that you're exposed to. I mean, that's the only one you could really speak to it.
well, I would say the biggest misconception is that the world is darker than it is light. By that I mean that there is much more danger, and that people are more negative than they are positive, especially if you keep watching the news, right? Especially if you keep watching the videos on WhatsApp. Uh, Based on my encounters, when I travel, there are more persons willing to help you than to take advantage of you, right? And I think that we get too caught up on material things. We get too caught up on commercial things. We get too caught up on money, right? And because we so caught up on money, we think that persons who have less or impoverished persons are automatically depressed, right? Financially, spiritually depressed, emotionally depressed. One of the things that I learned is kind of the opposite. The places, the most impoverished places, I've seen some of the most happy people, right? Unless it's extreme poverty,
Right, right.
right? But that's what I've seen because they tend to place more emphasis on quality of life rather than the quantity of what they have, whether it be forced or unforced, right? And so I think that it happens to all of us. I see it when it happens to us here in the Bahamas after hurricanes. Thank God for life, right? But 2 days before that, we complaining about everything.
Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah.
BPL can't keep the electricity on. They burn up my toaster and everything else.
Yeah.
But you let a
Toaster.
hurricane pass, you just thank God for life, right? Thank God for this bottle of water,
Right.
right? So I think the biggest misconception is very purposefully put out there for propagandistic reasons because it draws in money, it draws in likes, which is influence, which is still money, right? Because we, for some reason, we uh, we gravitate toward it,
Right,
right?
right.
We've come too used to that.
Yeah. So Ms. Hannah is asking here, and they say, how important is social commentary on the history of our nation? And I want to add to that before you go into that. Um, Part of that programming to me is coming from the fact that we watch too much TV, and we have left that. So let's tackle Mrs. Hannah's comment here.
Okay, how important is social commentary?
Yeah, art and social commentary and the history of our nation.
Art
Art.
commentary
Yeah.
and the history of it
Yeah.
is
You can't see
extremely
them on the screen. No.
No, I can't say it. It's
Okay.
extremely important, especially in the Bahamas, because we have very little photographs, right?
Wow.
We don't have a very deep or very extensive art history. Only in the 1950s or 60s did we see artists emerging in the Bahamas as professional artists or full-time artists, so to speak. We had traveling artists, famous artists who came to the Bahamas and rendered,
Right.
scenes of what they saw of our culture, but we did not have any quote unquote Bahamians like who lived here, who I shouldn't say we didn't have any, but it was not very known, right, or very popular
Right.
at the time. I'm sure we had persons who did engage in those types of practices, but it's extremely important. We need to be able to see, we need to be able to see what Pompey looked like. If we didn't know what he looked like, what did he do? Right? Because it's still a language, it's a visual language too. A lot of our history is very oral, right? We sing in these songs and then we lose the meaning of the songs, right? Because it's our dialect, it might even be a different language. 100 years later, we still sing it, we're still using the language, but what does it mean?
Yeah.
Who is able to even translate it anymore? It just becomes a practice instead of a way to archive our culture. And so it's the same thing with our visual culture. Only thing, your brain and your eyes kind of develop together. Your brain, your eyes, and your heart, right?
Okay.
So before you have vision,
Tell you all this guy deep. You all don't believe me.
you actually have a heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you go down and you hear John Canoe on Bay Street and they start up knocking them drums,
Mm-hmm.
you could tap into that. When you hear them reggae beats, those culture beats,
Right.
it literally tapping into your heartbeat. So some people wonder why do I feel so in tune with this? Because it's literally how you became a part of it. This is what it was you before you were you,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with art. We even the language is the same. Rhythm, you could see rhythm, you could hear rhythm, right? So certain words, certain terminologies actually are shared for the very same reason. It's like when you taste something, if something smells bad, no matter how good it tastes, it'll start to taste bad to you, right? Because of the way it smells, because all of those things are linked. And it's the
Right.
same thing with your vision. So long story short, is extremely important because we need to be able to remember. And like billboards, you see billboards for seconds, fractions of a seconds for that same reason, because immediately you could process it,
Right.
right? And you remember it.
Yeah. Well, with me, if it smells bad, it ain't getting in my mouth. No. 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 That food. No. Them. No. No. What is there's a song about a two-piece of chicken and all that.
Yeah.
Rapper's Delight, I think it was a song with a
Mhm.
piece in it too. Yeah. So recently we just celebrated majority rule, right? And majority rule was about access on a political environment and so forth. And we also know that Sydney is probably one of our most prominent, if not the most prominent, um, artists that we had. Um, did a lot to transform and knock down barriers and the like and so forth. So that was what I call doing the majority rule number one era. So we now need to move into majority rule number two to take the country to another level and so forth. And so when we look at that, we say, how or what would we say art does in terms of helping us to enable Immaturity Rule 2.0. And I saw Chantel Bethel's post just now, and she is another artist who has what you call it, thought-provoking type art, like you.
Okay, so how do visual arts help with the next step?
Yeah, to get to this point where we can become economically level and also to continue this movement of emancipating the mind so that we all have access. Because right now I believe we hold ourselves back more than anybody else. You said we have this perception that the world is darker than it is light. But when you travel, you see a lot of things or misconceptions. You don't see it because you see what the people are doing, which is different than what maybe was happening here on a day-to-day basis. People look at you, you got locks on, walking down the street, and they just dismiss you. But when you're away, they don't. At least that was my experience. I don't have locks, but I mean, nothing on top of my head now.
But I think it's a very interesting question. It's a very important question because sometimes we get so close to things that we tend not to see what it truly is, right? So some people would argue that we need more Renaissance men, more Renaissance women, and I'm here to tell you that we have Renaissance men, we have Renaissance women, we have examples of Black persons who are at the top of their game globally, right? So let's pay attention to what we have, right? Even when you look at somebody like Rihanna started off in what, music, then she branched off into entrepreneurship. Now she's being celebrated in our country. She's being celebrated worldwide, right? Let's look at Jay-Z, Puff Daddy. All these other persons, they started off in music. They went off into film. They went off into having their own product lines, their own franchises. So just as the definitions or the disciplines of art, because art has no rules, right? If I want to use the stock market as my canvas, then that's what it is. I could have an exhibition on the stock market. Why? Because I say so. But my job as the artist is to convince you or help you to see it. And if I'm a good enough artist, you will see it, right? Because the mind, even if something does not exist, your mind will tell you that it's there. That's how you hallucinate and stuff, right? So you will see things because your brain is processing what your eye is taking in, right? So yeah, I think that we have what it takes. I think that sometimes we need to ease off of the criticism and start being more thankful. If we start looking around and saying, okay, I'm thankful for this, thankful for that, maybe we'll see it for what it actually is. Instead of complaining, oh, we need more of this. If you keep saying we need more of, we don't have, you will never see it. Right. And so, like I said, we have examples. Sidney Poitier, you know, he died, and it's funny when you die or when these people die, all of a sudden the sales go up. He was celebrated before, but it is more emphasis placed on the significance of their life, right? And it should be, but I'm just saying it's interesting that it spikes at that point in time. So we have persons within the Bahamas. I think they just need the right light cast on them. They need opportunities, and I thank you for this opportunity because we need more positive people to engage in this type of dialogue. So I could have the best speech, I could be the most articulate person in the world, but if I don't have anybody to speak to engage with, then I'm lost. And like I said before, man is a communal creature, right? So my conversation with you, I'm learning from this conversation. I'm learning from the comments and the questions that I'm getting right now. I'd be a fool if I wasn't, right? And so that's how I approach life. That's how I approach my practice, especially as an educator. You know, being motivated, right? Knowing that is within you. You have it within you to change the situations, to change at least your world, right? And I think we need more of that, especially in our society, immediate Bahamian society, when we look at the types of crimes we have going on, right? It's that in itself is a different type of discipline. Is a different type of muscle that needs to be woken up and built, so to speak. Yeah, you need to exercise that a whole lot more. But the arts in the Bahamas, we need persons in spheres of influence to show people that, like I just said, art, when you think of art traditionally, art far exceeds those definitions, right? And so art is very much important to our progression as a society. Even when every political season, you see these photographs and these politicians look so, you know, flawless, you know, and they glowing like angels. In fact, that's how art was actually used as propaganda in the early church. That's how oil painting became popular, etc. When you look at these traditional churches, you see everything is gold and glistening, and you have the stained glass windows because it was tapping into the emotions of the congregation to make it's like a ceremony, it's a performance, it's theater. Okay,
Right.
so we have a certain section of the church built a certain way so that the music would travel in the most effective way, right? Because you did not have an amplifier back in the
Right.
15th,
Right.
14th
Right.
century, right?
Mm-hmm.
You did not have lights. So you had stained glass windows, and as a reason, it's facing a certain direction, the smoke and all the rest of these things. So a lot of these things tap into the human consciousness and how we feel. Because even people say, "Oh, I just be in the church, I feel so much better,"
Mm-hmm.
right? So uh, just studying these various responses to environment over the years, I pay more attention to these little things. Uh, and I'm always glad when I have the opportunity to sit down with persons who get it. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to interact, to work with who's then the president of the Senate,
Right.
uh, Sharon Wilson,
Right.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the persons who were in power at that time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so Miss Maynard Gibson as well. So they were very instrumental in having me carry my flamingo,
Right.
my exhibition that was based on the sinking of HMBS Flamingo, over into the Senate building for the first time in history. I personally took down these huge portraits
Mm-hmm.
of these Europeans, these European monarchs. I personally took them off the walls.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they've ever been off the walls because the walls behind them were still, it looked
Same.
like the original walls almost, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I took them down almost ceremoniously, and I was able to replace them with my own paintings
Mm-hmm.
of individuals who look like me and you,
Right.
individuals who I actually spoke to. I
Mm-hmm.
got their stories. They trusted me with their stories.
Right.
And now I had the opportunity to say, this is a part of our narrative. This is a part of the contemporary or the modern Commonwealth of the Bahamas,
Right.
Commonwealth
Right.
of the Bahamas. And so for me, this is a part of my purpose. This, I think, is in harmony with where I need to go. And I find joy in being able to do that because it's not only for me, because those men, the survivors, and even those who didn't survive by way of their family members,
Right.
were able to see, okay, so many years later, but these people, they got it, right? They
Mm-hmm.
got it to a certain degree, enough to celebrate it in this way. Politics aside, it didn't have to be done at all,
Right. Right.
right? So long story short, it's extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have an opportunity to do it as artists, I think that we definitely should, use it as leverage for the greater good of society.
Right. Right. So, Madam Producer, you want to put up those pictures of some of his work so Kishan could walk us through some of these things as we go down the road? Because when we look at our whole society, we very much still colonial mindset in a lot of ways, and we need to remove the shackles. And so, a lot of this work that you're doing, to me, does that. And somehow we have to find ways where we are a very creative country, and particularly on the youth, and we have to find ways in order to get them more engaged um, in a structural way so that they could live themselves, become them. They could breathe. So this particular one, is starting here. This is when you were on which ship?
In 2019, I actually had the opportunity to be artist in residence aboard Schmidt Ocean Institutes. It's a ocean science institute, and they work with some of the top ocean and space institutions and organizations around the world. It was founded by Eric and Wendy Schmidt.
Okay.
Eric Schmidt is the former CEO of Google, and Wendy Schmidt, both of them are business persons,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I was able to be a part of their expedition in the Pacific Northwest, and we were engaged in echo mapping the seafloor. So they basically were doing it. I learned how the instruments work, but they were discovering seamounts or mountains under the surface of the ocean. And so if you pay attention to a globe, or if you go to Google Earth, you would see in the ocean a lot of flat surfaces. It's not necessarily flat because the ocean is flat. It's flat. It's so flat because it hasn't been mapped. They say they know a lot more about space than they know about the ocean, right? And so there is an initiative to map the seafloor as close to the entire seafloor as possible. I think by 2030. Yeah, and so that's I'm in the control room of RV Falcor, the research vessel Falcor.
Wow, these $1 billion companies, and that's you in the middle.
Yeah,
On the
so
scene.
so I went from a multi-million-dollar boat to a wooden canoe in Haiti. And I like this shot because when you think about Haiti, people always tell you about the dust and the dirt and the deforestation. They very seldom mention water,
Right.
right? So I had the opportunity to visit one of the fishing villages, right? And so I took the opportunity to document that part of their culture. And so this is something that I do everywhere that I go. I document the culture, I document the environment, I speak to the persons who live in that environment, and try to get a better understanding of their situations.
And this is my favorite. It has so much motion in it, so much. Every time you look at it, I see something different.
Yeah, this is one of the large format paintings that I created based on my research on the sinking of HMBS Flamingo. So I actually created an entire exhibition that actually was a national exhibition at the time in 2013. So this particular piece uh, is more of a comprehensive narrative that gives you elements of the series of events in one frame, so to speak. So I captured the man in the water struggling, uh, trying to survive, or trying to float, or even trying to get away, or even dive from the MiG jets, the supersonic fighter jets from Cuba that were shooting at them in the water. In the background, you can see HMBS Flamingo shot up, smoking, and getting ready to sink.
Right.
And so this is when I actually started using red. My color palette changed to reds and blues.
No, I was gonna say, and this was the event itself happened shortly after our defense force wasn't even what you call it. It still had milk around the mouth, eh? No.
Yeah, it's very, very much in its infancy. So HMBS Flamingo was one of the first patrol ships, patrol boats of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Before that, we just had the police. The police had boats on the water.
Yeah.
So they actually brought Flamingo and a few other boats over from London, right? They sailed them. The England sailed them here to the Bahamas. And so this is basically our Pearl Harbor that had not been spoken about. I feel the way that it should have been. It needed to be more thoroughly examined, I would say.
Okay.
So because it was spoken about every year, they have a ceremony, but I think it needed visualization, right? It needed constructive criticism. It needed investigation.
Right. Cool. This is the picture when it was in, what I said, the police place.
Yeah, this is a Coral Harbor base,
Right.
the Defense Force base in Coral Harbor.
Wow. And so the I call it not what you call it, not the king, queen conch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we see that today, that is, especially when Christmas, when you all had all them lights on it and stuff like that. That was supernatural. And
Yeah, I like they put the lights on it. I wasn't responsible for the lights, but
oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Go
I
ahead.
was commissioned by the Public Beaches and Public Parks Authority to restore these metal sculptures that were created by the late Stephen Burrows. And so, of course, this is right up my alley because it helped me to tackle a bit of Bahamian history. I feel as though Stephen Burrows was a very unsung hero. You know, he was iconic, right? And I felt that his artwork needed to be respected. I felt that it was important for me to make my restoration visible once again because art and visualizing art and history isn't just the artifact or the product, is actually the journey. It's the performance of it, right? It's the motion of it, right? And for some people, that is even more meaningful because I have so many persons who stopped even on the roundabouts uh, with children, right? And say how the roundabouts actually became conversation pieces and they began to share bits and pieces of history, you know, with their children, right?
Right.
So each time that they pass or rotated, some persons would ride round and around the roundabout just to watch, right? So I'm glad they had that opportunity to do it because that's exactly what I did when I was small, right?
Right.
Sometimes we would ride round and around. So to be able to have uh, the youths of today have a very similar experience, you know, and for me to be able to make my contribution through making sure that these structures survive a little longer. And then as a more visual artist, as a painter, because Burroughs was more of a sculptor,
Right.
right? Now more of a painter, right? So uh, I just wanted to put my hand to it. Something I always wanted to do actually. So when I had the opportunity, I jumped at it because I really felt as though it takes a specific mindset to do certain things.
But they came to life once you touched them. That's the way
Thank you.
to me that's the way. I mean, I had tourists and like you say, Bahamians and like when they when people talk about these, they talk about them in a very positive light, and we identify with these structures around on the multiple roundabouts and so forth, and more so than actually some of the forefathers and the rest of the country, because a lot of their busts and statues are very small or pushed in the corner, and so these is what people see. And I think this is speaking to what Mrs. Hannah was asking in terms of how this whole creative picture paints affects our way forward.
Yeah. Like I said, it was. I mean, everything I do, I tend to gravitate towards work that is challenging, right? Things that I could physically step into. So obviously, these are larger than myself, right? So yeah, it was just stimulating to me to be able to see them come back to life, right? And not only that, but to see people commenting on it, right, more favorably.
Now, this was a part of a movie or I mean, a documentary, right? As I watched this at the National Art Gallery, if I remember right.
This I don't think this was at the National Art Gallery, but this, well, it is a part of documentation, uh, my documentation. So that's actually me on a raft that I constructed. So I Okay, so after my flamingo project, I traveled to Russia several times to do a little bit more research on socialism and communism and its connection to the Caribbean, right? So while I was over there, I studied Russian constructivism a little bit more. So Russian constructivism focuses more on kind of like building things more, like constructing things as
Right.
opposed to just creating fine art, like from like industrial materials, right? And so I grew my interest in those kind of things. And so when I came back home, I was invited to be a part of another show by a Russian museum, which asked me to respond to how do I maintain a sense of home as a professional artist, even when traveling to various parts of the
Okay.
world for residencies. And I thought about it and I realized I felt as though, as a member of this diaspora in the Caribbean, right, or in this part of the world, uh, we 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 still trying to figure out what it is to be a Bahamian, right? So we have been drifting. Some persons drifting physically, literally, and but in terms of our place, self of placement, sense of placement, we've been drifting, right? Drifting, trying to find identity, trying to find safety in various ways. And so I said, well, just like we do with our soups, our delicacies, we use the drops and we turn it into fine cuisine, right? Things that can be celebrated. So I did the same thing with the materials. I used repurposed materials mostly to create a raft that was inspired by the Kontiki. The Kontiki is a raft, a Polynesian raft that was a very renowned project back in the day. The space shuttle and the Bahamian sloops, as well as uh, rafts that you would see from migrants, immigrants moving throughout the Caribbean, drifting most of the time north for a better way of life. So I kind of merged or I fused all of those things that informed my opinion on us as persons in this region. And I built a raft. Uh, and it had to be a raft that I could literally float on, right? So in a nutshell, I'm using the raft as just like how I was on the multi-million dollar boat. It's my self-constructed research vessel. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
So this one is that's a flamingo from.
Yeah. So this was a sculpture that I created in Dubai last year. Uh, it was about, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of us who went over when the Expo 2020 first started. So I was artist in residence and as resident artist over there for about a month and a half, and I responded to the theme of sustainability. So the Bahamas Pavilion is located in the sustainability sector district, and so uh, I used the flamingo as a metaphor once again for sovereignty, right? But at the same time, the flamingo was an endangered species in the Bahamas, uh, and I use it to speak to the fauna, the flora and the fauna of the Bahamas. It more often you see, especially on social media, you see sea life uh, caught up in plastic, right? Fishing line, garbage, etc. The same thing happens to birds. You see them really being described in oil spills, etc. Pollution, basically. And so I use the golden flamingo because uh, Dubai is a place known for its riches, right? And I wanted the persons in Dubai, international persons, to see the golden flamingo and how it was being held back. So the golden flamingo actually represents not only gold as a physical resource, right? A resource from the earth, but it also is a metaphor for our human resource, right? Because we are being affected by these existential threats, these category 5 hurricanes, these 20 to 30 foot sea surges, right? That's our goal that we are losing on top of our landscape. We're losing people. We are being threatened every day. And so I created 2 of these. One is kind of flying up, but you could see is kind of being pulled back. And you can't see it too well because it's dark, but they are being held back by ropes. And at the end of the rope, there's a blue tarpaulin. So tarpaulin or tarp is something we see again very often in this part of the world, especially after hurricane or major storms, people covering up their roofs, etc. And so I kind of literally tied them together to make a statement. And there was a screen that was there that I had to work around, and it showed the pristine waters of the Bahamas, right? And so once again, we're in Dubai. I felt it was my duty to kind of make the connection. Okay, you like this water, you like this blue, but let me help you wrap your mind around this other aspect of the reality that is the Bahamas.
Oh my, you're going to Tower and Inferno.
Yeah, this was during the last election in the U.S. This was this was right outside the White House. So of course, COVID was up in the air to a certain degree, uh, and then tensions were so high, propaganda. It was just a lot to deal with all around. Protection, especially persons, I would say minorities, felt very threatened for very good reasons. Uh, and so, once again, it was always a part of my explorations or my investigations as an artist. A lot of people think that my Universal Human Experience project ended. It didn't end. It's just that through me interacting with persons wiser than myself, explaining what I was trying to accomplish, they told me, okay, this is a better methodology to do this.
Right.
So the flamingo will be a case study for a certain aspect of the universal human experience, right? So I could tie oceanography, all of these other things that I have been doing into the universal human experience. And so that's just me documenting uh, conflict, right? Socio-political conflict. And not only conflict, but you're battling other humans, you're also battling a virus, right? You're battling so many things.
Yeah. So, folks, if you didn't get the chance to do go on either the Facebook page or the YouTube page and look at Kishan's bio, because I really did a what you call a swipe at it because it's really in depth. And if you look at some of the things that he talked about there, then we won't. If we were to cover everything that he has done, we would be here until tomorrow, kind of thing. That's what I see there. And so here it is. My mom is saying that Kishan is so much more than an artist. Thank you for sharing your outlook with us. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then Miss Hannah Hannah again saying quite a fascinating body of work. Mad respect for your passion and humanity and our planet. So a lot of things you have accomplished from your perspective, and how well do people in society accept your work, and how or what is the way forward for you, and how you use it to inspire the youth? Before we,
Well, my goal is to keep moving, right? Not resting on any laurels. Persons, well, I mean, you were showing me respect right now by even engaging in this dialogue, and then you would introduce me to a different audience, and each person, you just read a few comments that were words of encouragement to me, right? So that is what we need. That's what I need, because sometimes you really feel down, and persons feel as though he is strong, he could take it. Yeah, you could take it, but sometimes that extra little word really makes a difference. But I feel as though I can make a lot more difference. Sometimes it's just a matter of time. Like we said, we spoke about Sidney. He did not read, etc., and look where he was able to literally go, what he was able to accomplish. And so I don't think it's. I think, like I said, mentorship is very important. Community is very important. Spirituality, I also feel, is extremely important, because those things help you to identify or figure out a sense of purpose. And that's one of the things that man actually needs: love, a sense of purpose, etc. And so if you're trying to live a more holistic life, you have to, first of all, know the ingredients of generally what comprises a holistic life. And so my goal is to continue, to try and use my time as wisely as possible. And I hope that persons along my path
Mhm.
would be able to assist me in these ventures. I think that's what we need.
Yeah.
Instead of bringing one another down when we see somebody trying to accomplish it, certain things we need to assist in various ways, and not just assist because you could write your name all over it, right? Or because it brings you publicity. Some things I've done you would never know I did,
Mhm.
because a lot of persons did things for me, and you'd never know they did it for me, right?
Mhm.
So it's that mindset. I wasn't born with it. That's what I learned from
Right.
these other persons, and directly and indirectly they mentored me. This is a way of life, right? This is how you contribute, right? And these things strike a chord within you if you have any sense, right? And you learn and you say, okay, if this did this for me, that act did this for me as an
Mhm.
individual, maybe I can have this profound influence on someone or many other persons, right? So that's one of the things I try to do in my with my professorship, right?
Mhm.
To teach uh, not only methodology, not only skill, but how to keep yourself inspired and how to activate or motivate at the
Right.
same time,
Mhm.
because that is what leads to education.
Right. Yeah. And so hmm, when my cousin John came home and he had the nose ringing and whatever else, and then his work was so elaborately different and so forth. Now you have persons like yourself, and I'm sure there was others along the way. If I call all the names, we will be here again for a long period of time. But in the art world, there's always this evolution and changing of what people perceive or conceive as being art. And now you have Dominic, my son, who's doing even something again, the slightly different arena. How do we use these things to encourage youth out there who might be like me, who can't draw, but have some creative flair to them? How do we have them understand how to draw that out of themselves so that they could use that for their benefit?
Uh, well, conversation first of all, like conversation mentorship. We have to make ourselves accessible to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we virtual, like you still have to reach out. Especially as you get closer to midlife, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, to that point of maturity where you have already gained so much uh, knowledge, right?
Right.
So much skill. You realize that if I keep, it's like eating. You get full, and you could eat a little bit more. But at
Mm-hmm.
some point in time, the more you eat, you're gonna actually make yourself sick.
Sick. Right.
So trying to retain so much, even though it's good, it could actually be bad for you. It could kill you. So
Mm-hmm.
you realize, okay, I gotta get some of this stuff out. I have to share some of this stuff.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with knowledge. So knowledge isn't only for you,
Right.
right? Like I said, you are given knowledge or allowed to have access to knowledge or inspiration to be able to share it,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is my belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to you are the it's being channeled through you, so to speak, right? And so that kind of goes to authorship, right? Uh, and Yeah, that's just the way that I see it. It is very important to have that communication and to keep up with the times, because right now art is kind of like creating digital art,
Mm-hmm.
right? Creating apps. So even persons who went to school for fine art, painting, etc., they might not even know what an app is or how to create an app, right? So you might have younger persons, just like video games, creating stuff uh, by themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's that community that they might actually generate that would be like a think tank, right? But if you have, for example, I might not know how to create an app, but I have access to funding or
Mm-hmm.
somebody who could assist them with getting devices that they need to facilitate them in
Right.
their creation, then
Mm-hmm.
that's one way that could really contribute, right, to what you're speaking of with the youth. And so now, as more art is becoming digitized and virtual because of the lack of physical interaction,
Mm-hmm.
right, you almost need a device to make certain things happen or to share what it is that you have created. So I think that's one way now looking at what's going on presently that could definitely make a difference. And I say that based on my experience at the university once again,
Right.
working virtually. Uh, so you need these devices.
Awesome. So I have one last question, and then I'll let you um, comment as to what you. I always ask my guests to say what they would like to say to the general public. But the last question is in relation to people in the 242. Um, like I said, people like myself might not be able to draw or paint. I could take plenty pictures, yes. People say my pictures are good, but um, how do how do we participate in this? We feel connected to the art world, but we might not be artists ourselves per se. So how what is needed? What from your perspective is needed to help person be able to participate? I'm sure there's a number of things that happen in the background that people can assist with, or on the like. What's your comments on that?
Well, I mean, the most popular form for artists would be patronage. Start buying some of the work. That always helps, right? Buying the work. We have a lack of constructive criticism. So
Okay.
if you are a person who is good with literature, you write pretty well. It's good to start writing about the work, because
Mm.
that is needed. Artists need that. They need that critical review,
Right.
right, of their work for professional purposes and for the dissemination of information,
Right.
right? And so that leads to publications, right? So if you could help the artists really publicize their work, because that could also equate to money. If you could give me a certain piece of real estate on a billboard, so to speak,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? I don't need to go and make the money to pay for it because it's in kind,
Right.
right? And so all of these contributions help. Even lobbying for the arts, you don't have to spend a penny, but if you know persons from a specific network or
Mm-hmm.
sector of society who are interested, they might not necessarily be interested in the arts. They might not know anything about the fine arts,
Right.
but you know that you do have influence, right? So you have persons who have, and then you have persons who don't have. So
Mm-hmm.
you make the connection, right? So that is always good for the community. It doesn't always have to be money. A lot of artists need spaces to create. Artists need materials.
Mm-hmm.
Artists need exposure to other artists. Artists need mentors,
Right.
not only locally but internationally. Artists also need education. So scholarships, sponsorships, in order to continue the regional and the international dialogue
Mm-hmm.
to help these artists expand their minds and expand their creativity, right? So there are various ways, even transportation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it
Oh, food.
because yeah, food, insurance, all of these
Mm-hmm.
things that uh, everybody needs but overlooks because you're speaking about art specifically. And I'm just speaking about the visual arts. You
Mm-hmm.
have musicians, right? So I don't want to speak too tightly
Yeah.
about art because it is so broad of a topic.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, those are the things that I think artists need. But respect,
Right.
definitely they need respect. Don't a lot of times artists ask for contributions, right? Let's say auctions,
Mm-hmm.
right? But not all of the time these artists, they can give to the auctions, etc. But sometimes these artists are struggling to survive themselves, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to think about the reality of art, the practice or the profession of art in the Bahamas, especially during this time of the pandemic, where I mean, a lot of persons just lost the stability, even in a 9 to 5,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to be innovative with our approaches, and we have to realize that art intervention is much more sought after, or creativity is even more sought after now in corporate worlds,
Right, right.
right? Because automation is taking over the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
right? Persons even quitting their jobs, so we have more machines doing the jobs of persons. So in the future, well, not in the future, right now, we're going to need persons who have a better creative grasp.
Mm-hmm. Right. Cool. Well, I know I said that was the last question. I have questions come up while she was talking, but I won't ask those because then they might ask more questions again. But so what would you like to see happen in our world, in the art world here in Bahamas, and what would you like to say to the public, government, or whoever out there who feels something on your heart that you want to say to them?
I'd like to see. Well, it's tough to say because everything has been so down uh, and so isolated in these last 2 years because of the pandemic. But I think we could always use a little more respect in the arts, a little bit more acknowledgement. I think that when it comes to the representation of art nationally, I think that we should pay careful attention to it should be inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that we need to see the Bahamas for what it is, for a very talented nation with a lot of thriving artists. We don't always know the persons who are creating significant work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think we need to keep in tune with what is happening. Like I said before, I'd like to see the economy pick up. We're speaking about the blue and orange economy.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see more action behind the speech,
Okay.
so to speak. I want to see more spaces, uh, more free spaces or safe spaces, so to speak, that aren't really, how to say this,
You mean like green spaces or
and that
like,
too, but spaces that persons from general walks of life,
mm-hmm.
right? Uh, it needs to be inclusive spaces, spaces where persons feel free and feel comfortable. They don't feel threatened in any
Right,
way to
right,
come. And I feel as though we need more spaces like that. And when persons feel more comfortable, then they tend to gravitate towards those spaces,
okay,
right?
yes, yeah, I know what you
And
mean.
so generally, I feel that we are an extremely creative, extremely resourceful people and culture. And I think we can make anything happen, even though we might complain a lot sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually have a tremendous amount of creative energy. And I feel as though we need a little bit more regulation in terms of artist opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't think all of the opportunities trickle down, so to speak, the way that they should. I don't know exactly why that is. I know some of the elements why, but we need persons in the positions who understand the significance of certain opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think we just need the people who have uh, the
Vision.
right positions to
Mm-hmm.
reach out to persons who have the right type of knowledge, right, and experience in order to make the connection, right? And that's how we're going to see, I think, a dramatic shift in the momentum in our creative culture.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Keisha, we're gonna have to bring you back at some later time because I mean, there's so much in this field, and you live it because you doing living art. I call it living art. You got art intervention. It just keeps. I could see it just keep growing and evolving. So we would like, behalf of Madam Producer, myself, had something to think about with myself. To thank you for being on the show with us today and sharing all of these nice nuggets and up inspiring people to see the quality of work that can happen, particularly in the arts, because we only tend to like to look at doctors, lawyers, accountants, and so forth, and the academics or pure academics, for instance, to see. And we push all our children to go that route, but I always say we're kinetic people, and so the more we could get a balance, then the better off we'll be as a whole, and so forth. So we'd like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Sharing the time. I know we said an hour, but I felt that we can do you injustice by cutting you off, so we didn't do so. So you're quite welcome, and thank you for supporting us.
Yeah, man, it was my pleasure. And thank you for the conversation. You know, every time I answer a question, you know, it causes me to think. And when you think, you generate. So it's always good.
Yeah, so folks out there, please do share this conversation so that all of the youth and whoever else is inclined will be able to learn from it. Hope it is of value to yourself, yourself out there on social media and the like. Digital reaches the world, so I know some of y'all are all over the place. Like I said, if you want to, you can also subscribe to the page so you don't miss any of the episodes that we have. I think we're on 50 something now, which is mind-boggling by itself, considering I never wanted to start one of these things, and so forth. And so, by all means, be safe. Vaccinate or isolate. That's what we say on the show. We want you to be safe so we could be able to be around to enjoy a lot more of Keisha and Monroe's work. And maybe you will be one on the show presenting some of your own work or whatever it is. So we look forward to that as we move forward. So thank you, Madam Producer. And thank you, Keisha, and again, Bahamas 242, the world. Have a good evening.